Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way. This is a podcast for serious writers who want to develop their skills in artistry and stand out in a crowded industry by taking intelligent, creative risks. I'm your host, Jonathan Ball. I hold a PhD in literature. I'm the author of numerous books, and I take a very analytical approach to art making, emphasizing both efficiency and experimentation. Please consider doing me a favor and pre-ordering my new book from Coach House Books, The National Gallery. It contains sonnets for Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, elegies in the manner of Rilke but for a dead iPhone, and other strange missives from yours truly, the Poet Laureate of Hell. So go to thenationalgallery.ca for more information. That's thenationalgallery.ca. Thanks. So I'm just here with Nick Burns, and Nick, you've done so much work.
Yes, I have. I'm old.
What would you say that if you had to just quickly summarize your experience?
I've been called a jack of all trades. Winnipeg's a small market. I'm an artist and writer, so I've done pretty much everything that you can think of. I've illustrated, written and drawn comics. I've worked for major companies like Marvel and DC as a colorist, writer. I've done radio when I lived in the Arctic. I have written without credit screenplays or rewritten them. Storyboards are a large part of my business. If you go to my IMDb page, Internet Movie Database, you can see 60 plus credits there. If you go to the Grand Comic Books database, you can see the comic work that I've done. I've written and drawn educational comics also while I was in the Arctic. A lot of different stuff, graphic design, I don't know, everything that my skill set seems useful for doing.
Now, and I know your work from a few things, but where I kind of first really encountered you was I wrote a book on John Pays.
Yes.
John Pays' Crime Wave, which is the title of the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's very creatively called John Pays'
People who know John will know Crime Wave.
Yeah, and you did a lot of visual artwork for that.
Yeah, John and I started out together at art school at the University of Manitoba. That's where we met, life drawing or drawing class, and hit it off very well because he was a comic book guy interested in comics, which was unusual at art school in the 70s when painting was supposed to be dead and artists at art school were supposed to be interested in, not in representational art, but in abstraction or performance art or video art or performance art. And as I say, painting was supposed to be dead. So John and I hit it off really well. We did a comic strip together in the Manitoban, the student newspaper, and then I did some work on his animated short and also on his short films and then on Crime Wave too.
Was that the short that was up for the British Award, or was that a different short? Or he did a series of them.
Yeah, he did a bunch of them, and I'm not sure. Some of them I worked on, some of them I didn't. Three Worlds of Nick were a collection of three shorts, and I did a little bit of stuff on some of them, I think. Again, we're talking years and years ago, so a lot of it I'm not clear on anymore. But certainly Crime Wave I did work on. I painted a glass painting for him. I did other art department stuff.
And so you've been working for quite a long time.
In 40 years or more really as an artist and writer. It's what I do.
This may be a weird kind of question to kind of jump out of the gate with, but what have you learned in all that time? It's a very big question, but how have things changed, and what have you really...
Oh, a ton, more than we can fit into.
What would you tell yourself working back in the 70s?
I was worried you were going to ask me that question. I mean, certainly I would tell myself that comics are going to be taken seriously, that they're going to turn into a respected art form. I should have known that, really, because in 73, the Winnipeg Art Gallery actually had an exhibit of comics art at the art gallery. It was really revolutionary for its time, and the catalog that went with it as well. And then a few years after that, 76, I think, Steranko had a solo show there. So the idea that comics were art was something that I was confident at stating even when I went to art school. And to be fair, the profs that I had at art school, they didn't disagree that comics were an art form. They just thought that it wasn't a direction that the people they were teaching should go in, that the galleries shouldn't be dedicating space to it. Again, it's what allowed people like Lichtenstein to get away with essentially swiping Kirby and other comic artists' work and turning them into gallery art that sold for millions. Comics were considered a separate thing from mainstream culture, certainly from high culture.
So how has that shift in how we look at comics actually changed what it's like to be a comics artist?
Well, yeah, it's improved in that certainly when you tell somebody that you're interested in comics, people are genuinely interested now, whereas they'd look down their nose at you, 40 years ago. It's almost impossible to try and put across how different people's attitudes are to pop culture in general today compared to the past.
It's hard. I remember talking to my daughter's 20, almost 20, and when she was younger, I remember she was like going to the library getting some comic books and stuff, and I remember saying to her, like, it used to be like if you were reading comics in school, you were a loser.
Yes, that's right.
Like,
if you wore a Captain America T-shirt to school, you get beaten up. Yeah, for sure.
And now it's, of course, it's like I say, it's hard to emphasize how much things have changed in terms of pop culture's its acceptance by just the mainstream public.
Yeah, and it's an industry that people respect and take seriously now because it's a career. You can work in the entertainment industry here in Winnipeg now, where you couldn't 40 years ago. When I was a member of the film group, it was hard to make movies, and there was no film industry here. At least certainly not like it is now. There were a few independent filmmakers, John Pays being one of them, but he was a trailblazer. And so that's one of the things that's changed.
Three Worlds of Nick, his three short films, when he put them together, it was feature length. Yeah. And that was the first Prairies feature to play at the Toronto Festival of Festivals.
Yeah. And again, all credit to John for actually, making that happen.
Well, has anything gotten harder? Like, to what degree has the shifts in the industry or shifts in the culture made it more? Has it made it more difficult to be a working artist in any way, or do you think it's been generally positive? Yeah,
obviously for me it's been super positive. Simply by having the set of marketable skills and being in the right place at the right time, I'm able to have a career. A lot of those ecological or economic niches within the industry are filled now. It was all wide open back then. What we used to talk about in the 70s, in terms of what the future would be like, is really interesting to compare with what actually happened. In the 70s, pre-internet, pre-500 channel universe, film on TV on demand, etc., we used to think that if we got a few more channels out there, we'd all have a better understanding of each other because we'd all understand each other's point of view. Women would have their own network and they'd be able to talk about women's issues and we'd understand better. And the left would have a bunch of channels, so we'd all understand the left wing of society better. And the right would have a bunch and we'd understand the right wing better. What happened, of course, was that all those things happened, but instead of people absorbing a plurality of viewpoints, we tend to silo or go into our own little bubbles with social media and movies and magazines, if we still read them, and television that reinforce our worldview rather than hearing or seeing or reading somebody else's worldview. And that, plus a bunch of other things that have happened within federal law in the United States. Under Reagan, they took down what was it called? The Communications Fairness Act was scrapped. In any case, a bunch of other things happened. Cable TV came out, and people were allowed to say pretty much anything they wanted without having to have what was known as balanced journalism, which was an FCC regulation in the States until the 80s. So the time since then has changed and made for a lot more strident viewpoints on both the left and right, and identity politics and everything in between.
One thing that I think has really shifted, I see a lot whenever I teach university classes, which I do from time to time. I have a really hard time because there's no common knowledge anymore. You can't assume people know the Cold War happened, or they don't even necessarily even all know who Hitler was. You just can't assume common knowledge. Whereas when I was a kid, and it used to be there were 3-4 channels. One of them was French, we all knew the same things, like it or not. And there really was a clear mainstream, and there was these fringes of the mainstream.
That's right.
And I feel now there is no mainstream, but at the same time, everything's just this fragment. You have a sort of a mainstream, but it's not like it was. It's not like a thing everybody knows. You can just be outside the mainstream completely and not know anything that's going on in the mainstream. You can walk around not really knowing anything that the person beside you across the street knows.
Yep.
And there's strengths to that, but there's also this problem, as you say, of having a shared language or a way to being able to communicate.
That's true.
And getting down to trying to be a writer working in the world, I find it a problem as a writer because you can't assume the audience knows a particular thing or will get a particular reference. You have to walk a weird line of you don't want to be just throwing information at them all the time and being too expository or whatever. Right. You need to really quickly convey often a lot of information and catch people up in kind of weird, subtle ways that it's not going to annoy people. So I'm just curious to know, how do you handle writing? Well, this is sort of coming around to a different question, but when you're writing for yourself versus writing for someone else, how do you approach dealing with this audience gap where you don't necessarily know who the audience is anymore? Because even if you have a demographic, that you can say, males, teens are going to be reading this. Even if you have a demographic like that, they don't necessarily know all the same things anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's a massive question. So how do we unpack the answer in such a way that it's comprehensible? Okay, I think we have to start with this idea that you were quite right about, that there's no common knowledge anymore. And people like Are You Serious? What's his real name? Ken Goffman, one of the founders of Boing Boing magazine, has talked and written about this. People my age are probably the last generation to work with what we'll call, for lack of a better term, a consensual reality. So it's even more profound than what you're talking about. If you think the world's flat and you've got all these YouTube videos and other things that prove to your satisfaction that the world is flat, and I think the world is round, and I'm writing about, say, science fiction or something that describes a round world, you're right, it's highly problematic. And this is something that we as a society are going to have to deal with. I don't see a solution to it, frankly. The advent of the internet, the relaxation of the balanced journalism regulations that I described earlier means that anybody can say anything they want about pretty much anything, and if it resonates with people, they'll find an audience for it. And some of these conspiracy theories and anti-science viewpoints of the world resonate with people for a whole variety of very profound and deep psychological reasons. And there's no talking them out of it, because you bring up something like, but if the earth is flat, here's these pictures we took. And
it's not
people,
rational,
that's right.
Rational
and the thing is, there's a book called Enlightenment 2.0 that talks about why this is a problem, and the idea that we need another wave of critical thinking that helps us sort through all these various belief systems and pseudosciences and so on that we're now confronted with, and that are being given equal weight to what we would historically have described as sort of the dominant cultural position, the mainstream, if you will. And there is a mainstream out there, but it's becoming increasingly superficial. It's difficult because critical thinking, the way I was taught, maybe the way you were taught too, logic, rhetoric, these things aren't taught. Debate, These
Well, I
things
was
aren't
to
taught
say,
in school.
I was actually taught it, which I think is the difference.
Well,
between-
exactly. And those tools are very useful in terms of parsing out what's actually going on in the world around you. And without those tools, you're kind of at sea. You're susceptible to believing pretty much anything if you don't have a way of thinking critically about what you're being told or shown.
So kind of backing.
So yeah, sorry. So that's the first half of the answer to your
Sure.
your very complicated question. How you write for that new audience, if you will, there's a bunch of different ways of doing it. One way that I see quite a bit is you simply write using all the given tropes of the genre you're writing in. This makes people feel comfortable. It's what they're going to the genre to read anyway. We'll stick with reading because you're a writer of text, prose. The other approach is to go back to an earlier form of writing, write impressionistically. People had to have, say, the way Thomas Hardy wrote, because they didn't have images in their head. So Hardy would write page after page on what a beechnut tree looked like. Some audiences may or may not have the patience for that, but that's another way of hopefully writing obviously very beautiful prose in such a way as your audience will go along and immerse themselves in the world that you're trying to create if you're writing fiction. The other thing is to write more simply. In other words, don't make pop culture references. It's difficult to do, but find your metaphors in other ways. I was going to use a William Gibson example from Neuromancer, the first line. The sky was the color of a dead TV station. Mm-hmm. But I'm not even sure how long that metaphor would hold up if people aren't watching TV anymore.
Well, I've got my new book coming out actually has a poem about how the TV has gone from being static to being a blue screen to being this whispery darkness. Mm-hmm. Where are we going is the next line.
Yeah. Well, and it's a good question. And of course, because I work a lot in the film industry, it's something that we're asking ourselves all the time. You should see the look on cinematographers' faces when they're told you have to shoot so that that the image is visible, comprehensible on a screen of a phone. As opposed to 25 feet across. I mean, you don't compose an image, whether it's static or moving, in the same way for an image the scale of a phone screen compared to, say, a large TV screen or compared to a large movie screen.
Do you think a writer really needs then, what do you think a young writer, let's say, who's just kind of starting out and thinking, I'm interested in comics, I'm interested in film, maybe I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I want to try these different things, and maybe they're kind of leaning towards, let's say, comics. Where do you think they need to start?
As a writer?
As a writer, or even just in terms of kind of trying to get their foot in the door a bit.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I would suggest is know your genre. Genre traditionally has been a foot in the door. And by genre, I mean everything from the lowest of the low. It means the lowest of the low. So, for instance, a lot of people in the 20s and 30s and 40s got their foot in the door as writers by writing pulp, writing the absolute worst, the least well-regarded fiction that existed on the newsstands back then. And they wrote comic books, which again weren't highly regarded, and they wrote pretty much anything that anybody would pay them to write, and then they worked their way up from there. They developed their craft. They made mistakes. Comics were like vaudeville. It was a place to do it as well as you could until you were good enough to do something better, and they moved up the food chain. I'm not sure if that system actually exists anymore. You see that people are sort of ghettoized. I know people now who have been writing badly for decades and are limping along. They have a day job, and they just keep making the same mistakes over and over again.
What do you think those mistakes are? One thing I see a lot is they have very ambitious. So somebody will start, they're like, I'm going to be a writer, and I've got a 10-book series planned.
Yeah.
And it's, I often want to say to them, like, why don't you try writing like a flash fiction and see how that goes, or even just writing skills. Like a lot of times people want to jump to like they're going to write a novel, and I often say, well, why don't you write like an article, a book review?
Yep.
And they often don't see the connection. But like where I learned the most was when I also worked at the Manitoban. Where I learned the most about writing was having to have, we had to get that paper done every week.
Yep. Yeah.
And you had to write something by 4 p.m.
Exactly. And again, that's a great resource as well. If you're in a deadline situation, nothing like a deadline to sharpen the mind.
Well, and you learn skills, right? What I find is what I learned eventually when I was younger was I learned that I could write. If that and it sounds kind of stupid to say it that way, but it's like it took me a while to really learn that I didn't need to have a great idea. I didn't need to have like inspiration. I didn't need to have anything except for like time to sit down and do it. And I could take anything once I had the skills down, like I could take anything and kind of make it interesting.
Yeah, and again, you have a transferable skill, right? So when I started off, my earliest writing was like most kids. I was writing for school, and I was a precocious reader and writer. By grade 7, I was reading and writing at a University 1 level according to tests that they gave us in school. And fortunately, my teachers in school recognized this and were able to keep me engaged in what we were reading. I was one of those nerds that loved Shakespeare in high school and loved reading Neville Shutes on the Beach. I hated The Hobbit because I was reading hard science fiction by then and other things, and I didn't have any time for little trolls and dwarves and all this stuff. I was more interested in hard science fiction. But so I was learning my craft at school. They marked me harder, and I was told this by my English teachers because they knew I was capable of more. And they, to their credit, they would sometimes let me write my own things, poetry, prose, rather than maybe the exact assignment as given, if I could justify it. And again, they would mark me accordingly because they knew that they saw I demonstrated that I had more ability in this area than average. So they treated me accordingly. But that isn't going to be every student's experience. And it wasn't always my experience either. I remember being hammered in history class because we had to write I chose Louis Riel to write about Louis Riel. And at that time, this is again the 70s, Louis Riel was, there were 27 books on Louis Riel. I'm sure there's many more now. But I read them all because I was a fast reader and a precocious reader, as I noted earlier. And then I wrote a book report that said nobody's ever going to know who Louis Riel really was or what he was about. The historical waters have been muddied so much. One book would say he was insane. One book would say he was a traitor. Another book would say he was a religious visionary. One would say he was the founder of the province, which is technically true, I suppose. And all those different narratives, I couldn't see any way that they were going to be resolved. And of course, that battle for Louis Riel was going on within our culture at the same time here in Winnipeg, in Manitoba, across Western Canada, for that matter, because Riel had been hung as a traitor by Macdonald, the founder of the country. So how do you go about rehabilitating Louis Riel? And that was physically and artistically fought over the famous sculpture of Louis Riel.
Yeah.
The first Louis Riel sculpture in the legislative grounds, where the seat of our provincial government, was a twisted figure. I forget the name of the artist, my apologies, but he looked like a twisted little dwarf. Also, he had an erection. Hope I can say that on your podcast.
You can say whatever you want on my podcast.
But needless to say, there was considerable uproar within the Métis community and elsewhere over this sculpture for all sorts of reasons, including the ones I outlined. I hope the problem with the founder of the province being portrayed in such a way is understandable. And of course, eventually they replaced that statue. That statue, if you want to see it, minus the erection, which got broken off at some point, is in St. Boniface by St. Boniface College. And the statue that replaced it on the legislative grounds has the all the tropes of the heroic founder of our province. The head is quite small, the body is quite large. He looks very dignified and respectful, and he looks like people expect the founder of the province sculpture to look like. So there's an example of me being very contrary in my writing over a controversial figure in our history, and I didn't benefit particularly well in terms of the mark I got for that particular form of writing. But I was also writing for the student newspaper in high school, and I was writing for the community newspaper too. I was covering sports for the Selkirk Enterprise at the time. And again, as you said earlier, writing is writing. If you learn to write and meet a deadline, it's a great skill to have in your quiver. And I had to do that. I had to go cover the game and then write up a report of the game, and then get the story to the editor before the paper was printed. So it was a good skill to have, and paid me very well in terms of experience. I don't think I got paid any money for doing it, but I was learning. I was learning at the same time, and seeing my work in print and getting feedback from the players and getting feedback from the parents and feedback from the fans. So yeah,
that feedback loop is really important too.
It's crucial.
I feel like one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're starting out is they don't put their work out, and they don't get the feedback, and they don't realize, they're so afraid often of bad feedback or rejection or whatever it is, negativity of any type, that they don't realize that that's what they need. They need to fail, and they need to figure out what they did wrong. Like, it doesn't really matter at those early stages what you did right.
No, and the thing is, failure is the way you learn. And because we're in a society now that gives out awards for participation medals and is always trying to accentuate the positive, which I completely understand. I mean, I think that's better than stigmatizing people for being unsuccessful. But at the same time, if you're actually trying to improve your craft, whether you're trying to become a better athlete or a better writer, there's no point in being told that's great, regardless of what sort of effort and what sort of finished product you've produced. It's important to have constructive criticism, and I stress constructive, because in the world now of the internet and so forth, it's perfectly easy to get negative criticism or cruelty.
Destructive.
Yeah, or destructive criticism. So again, go and find out what constructive criticism is, so you know it when you get it, and you know when people are just being mean, to keep it simple.
But that feedback of just,
But you do need feedback, sure. And I got it, and that feedback is crucial, because I wasn't good when I started out, and constructive criticism helped me get better. Constructive criticism from the editor, constructive criticism from the readers, constructive criticism for the people I was reporting about, the athletes themselves, all helped me become a better writer. I understood the game I was covering better. I understood the craft of writing for a sports report better. And of course, I was reading other people's sports reports and learning from that too.
What I see too is people, they pick a very ambitious project, like they're going to write a novel or a novel series, and they can't do it, they fail at it in some ways, and then they get discouraged and quit. It's like, well, of course you couldn't do that.
Sure, and I get that all the time too. So what I tell people when they come at me with, they have this plan for a 10-issue or a 10-story epic, space opera, whatever it may be, I tell them, do yourself a favor. They don't always listen, by the way, but this is what I tell them, is if you're wanting to learn how to write, say, a comic book story, write a 3-page comic story, beginning, middle, and end, and finish it. Or if you're writing prose, I'd say write a short story, 10 pages, something manageable, something where you can fail and then get feedback on it, so you're failing upwards. There's 2 ways to succeed at being a creative individual. 2 ways to succeed at anything, really. One is to do it and finish it. So that's part of the same thing. If you haven't finished it, it's not done. There's no art until it's finished.
I'd like to say...
So that's rule 1. Rule 2, fail upwards. So expect failure. When you first start, if I said, let's go out and run a marathon, you'd look at me quite correctly as if I'm nuts. You haven't trained to run a marathon. You haven't put in the legwork, literally, that's required to be able to run a marathon. So you go out there and you don't run a marathon your first time out. You go out there and run what you can run. And you figure out, okay, I can run this much right now, and I want to be able to run 26 plus miles for the marathon at this point over here. And you figure out what sort of training regime you need to get to being able to run a marathon. And it's the same thing with writing. Start small, write something manageable, write poetry, learn how to be efficient with words. Write short stories, write anything that gives you a beginning, a middle, and end. Get constructive feedback on it. Fail upwards. Do better next time. I know it sounds simple, but those are the rules. That's how it's done.
Yeah, I often say, if you go back and look back in history, like who succeeded and who failed, of all the people who've tried to, be working artists and so on, what the commonality is, if they succeeded, it's because they didn't quit and they didn't die.
Yeah. And or they got good fast. Yeah. And then they died early.
And that's my advice. Don't quit and don't die.
Well, that's good advice in life, for life in general, for sure.
And as I say, it sounds simplistic, but the underlying thing is, people quit. I've seen so many times people who are very good. Often, I've seen a lot of one-book authors. Like friends or people that I've known that they put out one book, so they could do it. They proved they could do it. Yep. They had the skills to do it. They had everything to do it, except they quit.
Sure, and that doesn't make a career. That makes a one-book, one-hit wonder, which is fine too. I mean, if that book is,
that's what you want.
And if that book is all you have to say, or all you have the time or ability to do in your life, well, you've got that one book done. You're ahead of all those people who never finished.
Even just finishing your book and never publishing it, it's a disaster. I always say congratulations.
Well, sure.
How many people even do that?
Well, yeah, and this is or starting. I mean, you got to start, and you do it to the point where you realize, well, this isn't useless, this isn't useful. You put it in a drawer. I can't tell the number of things I've started and not finished, but my advice to people is to start it and finish it. And the reason a lot of the stuff I didn't finish was just because nobody was willing to pay me to finish it. I put out a pitch and it didn't catch. Nobody wanted to pay me for it. I make a living doing this, so I got to go and pitch something else.
But at your position is different. At that point, you can start pitching things and get people.
Well, and this is the advantage about getting good at something, right? People will actually ask you to pitch. Yeah. And I have publishers now that I've got a career, and that I've got a body of work, small as it is, they'll say to me, "We'll publish you if you pitch us the right thing." They've seen enough to know that I can do it.
I see people starting out trying to pitch. It's like, no, you have to do something. You have to do something first. Sorry.
Yeah, it's catch-22, right? I mean, I can understand it. You don't want to go to all that work. But what happens is, if you don't have a body of work, then how is anybody who's hiring you to do something going to know you're capable of it? They can't take your word for it. Their livelihood depends on knowing that you're capable enough to do the work, and then they'll accept your pitch. That's the way the business works.
I'd love to talk to you some more. I've got to let you go just because I kind of grilled Nick had just been doing a Super Pulp Science podcast, and I just happened to be sitting like across the room doing my own thing, and I just kind of dragged him into a podcast here.
Yeah, no, I've got
so
time.
He's in a chatty mood, but I've got to go to a meeting right now, so I apologize, but I'd love to have you back on some other time to talk more.
Yeah, I know.
And it's so nice for you to talk to us, and
great. I hope it's useful to neophyte writers out there.
Can people find you online in any particular place?
Yeah, I've got a website. They can at least see the drawings that I've done, little bits and pieces of various comics that I've written and drawn. Nicholas Burns Art, nburnsart.com. Don't even know my own website address. nburnsart.com. You got to poke around a bit. It's a creaky, old-fashioned website, so you have to do a little hunting, but that'll open up some stories that I've written there. NRA High School, a great scathing satire on gun culture in the United States, for the people who are interested in that, is available for free through my website. Where else can they look? They can go to my IMDb page, Nick Burns, and see the various movies that I've worked on in various capacities, at least credited capacities. I think that will give people lots to look through if they're so inclined.
Great. So I go to nburns.com and
nburnsart.com.
nburnsart.com, and I'll link to that also.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
And other things I find on Nick online if you go to writingthewrongway.com. So nburnsart.com. And thanks again for talking to us, and keep writing the wrong way.